I'm Dean Baker. I'm the co-director at the Center for Economic and Policy Research.
Hi, I'm Aaron Swartz, and I'm founder of a site called watchdog.net. Hey, how's it going?
Very good so far. It's Monday morning, so what bad could have happened yet?
I don't know. In some jobs, quite a bit.
Yes.
So why don't you start out by telling us what the Center for Economic and Policy Research actually does?
Well, what we like to think of ourselves as doing, I'll steal a line from my old boss at the Economic Policy Institute. We like to think we're keeping the world safe from economists. We try and look for areas where there are important aspects to policy debates that are missing. And just to give you a few quick examples, in the Social Security debate, I've been doing work on that for over a decade, and if you go back to the 90s, you had a lot of people saying that the program was about to go under, and this was really across the political spectrum, Democrats and Republicans. And, of course, that was an argument for either privatizing and or cutting the program. So we were pointing out that actually the program's in pretty good shape. And I wrote a book with Mark Weisbrod, who's now my co-director, called Social Security, the Phony Crisis, where we were arguing that actually, the numbers show the program's in pretty good shape long into the future. And, that had a very, very big impact on the debate. A lot of people now accept that view. I mean, we weren't the only ones saying that, but we were among the first, and, we really got our arguments out there. Another case, the housing bubble. We were pointing out that there was a bubble in the housing market, that house prices were overvalued. There were a lot of bad loans being made, and that it was going to end very badly. And I began doing that back in the summer of '02. Got some people listening to me, obviously not enough, but, we did have some impact.
So as you say, you used to work at the Economic Policy Institute. So why? And they do a lot of similar stuff, right? I think you even started the union over there. So why did you think a new organization was necessary?
Well, I just felt we could do more on our own. That we could get our stuff out quicker, address a wider range of issues. I like to work fast, and the way policy debates work, very often if you don't get something out quickly, you might as well just throw it in the garbage. So. We felt we could do more on our own with, a small, less bureaucratic structure, which isn't to say that the Economic Policy Institute is terribly bureaucratic in the scheme of things, but we just felt, doing things directly, doing them ourselves, we can get them out more quickly. And also, there are a wider range of issues that, I'm interested in that, at the Economic Policy Institute there might have been a little more concern about. And just to give you one concrete example, I've worked on alternatives, analyzing alternatives to patent financing for prescription drug research. And, that's something that, not to say I never could have done that at the Economic Policy Institute, but I think there'd be more concerns about it than, just what we have here, where we could write something on it, raise the issue, and try to get some debate going on it.
So that's like an interesting example. A lot of stuff you seem to work on is this kind of institution building, where you're designing a system for replacing drug research or replacing textbooks or solving the housing crisis. I mean, is that kind of how you look at your job, is building these kind of institutional structures that, will solve these policy problems?
Well, what we're trying to do is think of places where you can have an alternative institutional framework. And, what strikes me is, very often, the right has been very effective in setting up institutional structures that support, sort of an upward redistribution of wealth. And, I think they've been very conscious of that. And, I saw this very well in the Social Security debate. So they kept coming up with sort of halfway measures where they say, okay, we're not going to force anyone into a privatized system. We're just going to give them the option. And they would carefully design it so that it would flow in their direction, so that you'd set up a market structure where it would go towards a privatized system. And, it was a very, very clever design. And what's occurred to me is, well, no, let's try and think about setting up market structures that go the other way. So, in the case of public support for prescription drug research, the proposals that I've worked through would say, okay, suppose we had public support for prescription drug research. We could even have that go side by side. The pharmaceutical industry, Pfizer and Merck, if they want to, go ahead. Just keep, even get your patents, which of course is a government intervention, government-granted marketing monopoly. But in any case, go ahead and compete if you want. The only problem is, they're going to be competing against drugs which very often might be as good or better than theirs and will be selling for generic prices. That probably doesn't look very good for Merck, but on the other hand, that's their problem. That's just the market. So anyhow, I try to think of ways in which we could restructure create a new institutional structure that would accomplish, to my mind, at least better outcomes than, what we see today.
So what's the market for these kinds of new institutional structures? I mean, do you get the sense that politicians are kind of out there looking for things? I mean, I know you have this brilliant own-to-rent plan to deal with the housing crisis, and yet it seems largely ignored in favor of the kind of standard, centrist solutions.
Yeah, it's of course an uphill battle. I mean, it's the structures are very, very much entrenched, and that's actually a very good example because we have gotten some pickup on that. We've had some members of Congress, Representative Grijalva from Phoenix, actually introduced a bill that basically is the own-to-rent plan.
Can you just explain the own-to-rent plan briefly?
Yeah, this is recognizing that we have millions of people now who are facing the loss of their home. So the question is, what could we do for them? And there's currently a bill before Congress that, at least as I understand, is very likely to pass now. It's supported by Dodd in the Senate and Barney Frank in the House. President Bush may veto it. But in any case, that involves sort of a complex bailout, which to my mind is likely to end up giving more money to the bankers than really helping the homeowners. There's just a lot of aspects of it that I don't think are very well designed, and probably it's not going to do at least what its stated purpose is, of keeping people in their homes. Now, we turned around and we said, is there something we could do given this situation? And again, I was warning about the situation, but that doesn't do the people any good who are now in it. And the question is, can you find a way that will help people who are facing a loss of their home? And the own-to-rent plan is very simple. It just changes the foreclosure rules, at least temporarily, saying that people who face foreclosure on their house will have the option to stay in their house as a renter paying the fair market rent. And it does two very nice things. One is it obviously just provides security. So if a family likes their home, they like the schools, they like the neighborhood, they have the option to stay there. They won't be owners, but they'll be renters. The other thing that does is it radically changes the equation. So now throwing someone out is not an easy option for a lender. They're going to get stuck as being landlords, or at least they take that risk, which of course they do not want to be landlords. So it gives them a really strong incentive to turn around and try and negotiate terms that allow people to stay in their home as owners. And what's very nice about it, at least to my mind, is it doesn't require any public money, doesn't require new bureaucracy. You could pass the law and it would take effect immediately.
So as you say, you've seen a couple representatives pick it up, but most people have fallen support behind the kind of, Frank Dodd plan, I guess. Why do you think that is?
It's a real uphill struggle. You have a tremendous institutional structure behind, these sort of centrist policies. Home ownership is gospel. And even, actually, I think my plan would actually probably do more to preserve home ownership than the Frank Dodd plan. But nonetheless, the idea that you might end up with some of these people being renters, you simply can't have people talk about it. But I think, it's, the one hand, there's the ideological issue. You have a lot of entrenched, interest here that are close to Dodd, that are close to Frank. Some of them housing activists who'd been pushing ownership for years, and they kind of have egg on their face right now, so they don't want to acknowledge that maybe that wasn't a terribly good thing to get someone into a house in 05, 06 when prices were overvalued by 40-50% in some areas. And then on top of that, there's a clear financial interest. The financial industry likes the Dodd-Frank bill because what that's going to mean is that in a lot of mortgages where they would otherwise lose their shirt, they're likely to still take a loss, but they're going to take considerably less of a loss because the government, in effect, is bailing them out. So you have a lot of powerful interest, and it's a real uphill struggle to try and organize against that because, these are the people with access to members of Congress, access to the media. I mean, we've been reasonably good in getting this stuff out in the media, but still, it's we're like the only ones out there going against organizations that have budgets that each of them might have budgets that are 20, 30, 40 times our size. So that's a tough battle. We play way above our weight, but that still puts us way below where we have to be to change the policy.
So one of the things I've been thinking about, is how do you lift ideas and organizations up to that level, and one of the things we work on at watchdog.net is building these kind of tools so that people can organize and complain to their politicians and try and push policies that, a politician wouldn't normally subscribe to. I mean, do you think there's any, chance in getting the kind of netroots and the activism around the blogosphere and all the people who are kind of getting excited and more involved in politics thanks to the internet and using them and kind of going after them and explaining the proposal and getting them excited about that and using them as kind of a way to help pressure politicians in a way that, perhaps as a small, think tank, you can't really get the media or the lobbying effort to do.
Well, I think there absolutely is, and we've benefited a huge amount from the internet. I mean, it does make a huge difference already, but it'll be even more in the future as we develop better communication networks on the web. I mean, we're getting there. The other part too is the flip side, that as the mainstream media erodes further, because I mean, face it, there's still a lot. However much we might do with the blogs and different things on the web, there's still a lot more people that are going to see CBS Evening News or read the New York Times. So we still have a long way to go in equalizing that, but the trends are in the right direction. And I have to say, I don't cry every quarter when I read that newspaper circulation's down another 8%. I think that's basically a way of entrenching the current structures, limiting debate. The Washington Post just their major source on the housing market over the years 03 to 06 was David Lira, the chief economist with the National Association of Realtors. Now, they should be hugely embarrassed by that. I suspect they probably have never even had any serious discussion like how could they have been so incredibly inept in reporting on the situation. But that's what we're up against. And as I say, what's good is that the trends are going in the right direction, but we still have a long, long way to go.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's been one of the most powerful effects of the blogosphere, is even if it hasn't really changed politicians and changed voting yet, it's kind of changed people's thinking and people's ideology in a way that's much more subtle and harder to measure. Like this kind of criticism of David Lira or of particular moves politicians made or of stories in the media. There was just really no popular market for it back then. Like Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, has this great magazine that I write for extra, but its circulation is nothing compared to the popular liberal blogs. And so I think now there's a real market for this kind of media criticism, and it's going to a much larger audience than before.
That's right, and they're really defensive. I mean, I could tell you some first-hand experience. I've had a number of reporters at major publications, places like The Post and National Public Radio and other publications call me up. They see me write something on my blog, and they think I was unfair to them, and I'm happy to have a conversation. But the point is, they care. That they saw me write something, and they're worried. However many people are going to see it. And I obviously don't have the biggest blog. It's not daily costs or anything. But in any case, they feel that I'm misrepresenting them. I'm going to embarrass them, and they're going to respond to that. So if we have the conversation, I think that's a really great thing, because maybe they'll just hang up on me and curse me out or something, whatever. But the fact that they at least care, that it's like I'm sitting over their shoulder. Because again, I think of it sort of as a counterweight. That very often, I've had a lot of reporters tell me this too, that when they're writing something, they think their editor is sitting over their shoulder, which of course they are. And more often than not, their editor is fairly conservative. So they're worried they're talking to too many progressive economists. They have to go get some right winger to balance it out or something. So if we could put some pressure on the other side, that's a great thing.
Do you think they're just sitting and reading your blog? How do they come across these stories? Do they just repeatedly search
some of
blogs
them do read my blog regularly. I know that. Some, they've told me that, at least, maybe they're lying. But, but I've had a number of reporters tell me they read the blog. The other thing they do, of course, a lot of us do that, you just Google, see what pops up. And, if I made a point of trashing something that they wrote, then it's likely to pop up. So, I think in some cases they may read the blog regularly. In other cases, they might just do a Google search, or maybe a friend points it out to them. Maybe someone else is reading it and they shoot it over.
So I guess the lesson is, always use reporters' names when you're making fun of them, so that they come across your blog post in a Google search.
Well, it actually is a good idea, but I generally don't use their names, and it's for two reasons. One is to be a little more diplomatic, but the other is, just purely practical. You don't always know who wrote the story, in the sense you could identify the story by obviously the byline, but stories are edited, and
right.
Sometimes what appears in print is very different than what the reporter wrote. So I generally just say a New York Times story, Washington Post story. I don't say this particular, again, unless I see the same reporter again and again and again saying the same thing, then I might decide, okay, I'm going to hit this reporter. Or if I talk about a columnist, of course, I usually, if I'm talking about Thomas Friedman, I'll say Thomas Friedman said.
Why do you think, you commonly see these chains with reporters like Judith Miller, where she just prints falsehood after falsehood and just has this record of failure. And yet they just continue to get really prominent placement in the media, and it just seems like they have dirt on the editors or something. They just can't get fired no matter how repeatedly wrong. I mean, what's the problem with accountability in newspapers? You pointed out this great error the Washington Post made about GDP in Mexico, and it was just an obvious factual numerical error where they had screwed up the number, and it took forever to get any kind of accountability or apology or even just to print a retraction about it. Why are they so hesitant to go back and correct mistakes they've made?
I think there's a few things. One is, it would be embarrassing, and the particular error in the Washington Post, I mean, they had Mexico's GDP quadrupling between 1988 and 2008. This was in the context of saying what a great success NAFTA has been. Why they chose 1988, by the way, I have no idea, because NAFTA, of course, didn't go into effect until 1994. But in any case, they had its GDP quadrupling, which was just nuts. I mean, the data on that's very straightforward. It increased by something like 70%, I think the number was. So it's totally different ballpark. So I think one of the things was that it's hugely embarrassing. A second is that it is remarkable, and I'm saying this from having spoken with some of these people, they really know almost no economics, and it's just kind of incredible, kind of painful. Not that I think everyone has to be PhD economists, but certainly if you have reporters and editors writing about NAFTA, knowing what GDP is kind of seems the bare minimum. Again, they don't have to know what GDP is, but then they could, write about something else. They could, write about foreign policy or, I don't know what. But, but if you're talking about, growth and how effective NAFTA was, you don't know what GDP is, it's incredible. But I think they really don't. The third thing is that we don't have the ability to beat up on them. And this is, the analogy I often make. Suppose they had some story that said that Bill Gates had, illegally violated antitrust law. And in fact, there wasn't evidence for that. Well, Bill Gates or his lawyer or whatever would be down on them like a ton of bricks in 10 minutes. They're going, where'd you get that? You better correct that, this and that. We don't have anyone that could do that. I mean, I can call him up and yell at him, but at the end of the day, they could just hang up on me. Whereas, Bill Gates' lawyer, if he calls and yells at him, they know if they don't take him seriously, they're going to be facing a serious lawsuit. So we don't have that ability to do that. So between one, don't underestimate the ignorance. There's an incredible amount of ignorance. Two, the desire to avoid embarrassment, and three, we simply don't have the force that the other side, that the Bill Gates of the world have in forcing them to at least not make mistakes against us.
One of the things I wonder about also is whether there's this kind of insecurity that comes from both not knowing what they're talking about, as you say, but also being these kind of really respectable journals of opinion. If you're writing for the New York Times, you come out every day under that masthead. People kind of trust what you say, and so I wonder if these journalists kind of go home at night, thinking, well, I'm this fraud, right? I'm published in the most, respected, important newspaper in the country, and yet I don't know what GDP is. I really have to, keep up my guard and not let anybody poke holes in it. And so this kind of insecurity they have about their careers feeds into this refusal to correct themselves.
I'm sure there are cases of that. In this particular case, I think they really didn't even understand that, that they were way off. I remember in particular, this was actually the post-fact
checker. How is that
chapter.
possible? I mean, it's just a number, right? You can look it up. It's either 400 or 70. I don't see, if you could show them where it says 70, how can they?
I mean, that's why this thing was so painful. I mean, I actually ended up, one of my posts was I called it the postmodern fact checker. Because after going back and forth with him, and I really spent a lot of time on the phone, I thought it was just going to be very quick, because I was, as you said, just say, here, I gave him the IMF, so it wasn't like I had some cooked numbers. I said, here, look on the IMF website, here's the series, there it is, nothing more to talk about. But then he found another series, and he didn't know what that was, and then he found a third series. They weren't measures of GDP as we would care about, because they didn't adjust for inflation. And, this isn't controversial. No economist, I don't care where they sit in the political spectrum, conservative, liberal, libertarian, you'd adjust for GDP. It doesn't make, for inflation. It doesn't make any sense not to. But I don't think he understood that. So at the end of the day, he wrote, well, you could take this series, you could take that series, and, Baker likes his series, but, the Post has their series. And I think he really didn't understand that. No, this isn't something you could just take one series or another series or another series. There is only one series. And I don't think he understood that. And, of course, the difference is, as I say, between quadrupling and increasing, 70 or 80%, that is enormous. And as I say, I think to this day, if we got him in the room, he probably still wouldn't understand that. No, you, totally missed it.
So let's move on to something that is a little closer to my heart. Software funding. You've written a couple of papers, kind of proposing different mechanisms for funding software, letting it be kind of open source and publicly funded instead of having this sort of copyright monopolies assigned by the government to particular players. And one thing that's become really popular in the kind of music policy world right now are these systems of alternative compensation systems, where the plan is basically everybody gets a voucher with their every hard drive they buy or their internet connection or something, and at the end of every month they can kind of vote on which music they like the most, and part of the money they get gets distributed to those artists. So in exchange for paying a little bit more for your internet connection, you get to download whatever you want, and there's the system in place that kind of redistributes the money to the people who are most popular, who are most liked by various users. I know you've proposed a couple similar schemes for addressing this problem. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Yeah, I proposed two different ones. One, I'm thinking more of, sort of a one, I don't know if I call it quite top-down, but sort of publicly funded software core, whatever you like, thinking more of sort of more technical uses. And then what I call the artistic freedom voucher, which would be sort of for end products like music or video games or, user software. And the distinction is that in the first case, you might envision that, I at least could not tell you like what a good operating system is to work on, or what are the problems to make Linux better or to make Windows better, whatever. I wouldn't be in a position to know that. So I think for something like that, at a more technical operating system level, it'd make good sense to have a public funding, as we have now with the National Institutes of Health. They get $30 billion a year to do basic biomedical research. You could do the same thing with software research, where you pay people to, develop, deal with various problems that, are slowing down the advances in computer technology. And the quid pro quo, and again, this could all be privately contracted, so it's not a question of government versus private sector. You could contract it out. We don't have to, have the czar of, computer software say, here's what you develop, here's what, you contract it out, have long-term contracts, and, have money paid out to companies that will then, have their work evaluated at, say, 10-year intervals, whatever it might be. But the key here is that everything they do is in the public domain. So that means both, it's, people could, all the code is public, and also there's no copyright. There's no copyright attached to it. You could actually have copy left, which I think is a good principle, the idea being that anyone could use it as long as they don't charge. If you want to charge, you come talk to us, and of course you make it very, very difficult if you want to do that. So that's one way to go. The other way, as I say, for more consumer products, we're going to decide what music we want to listen to, what videos we want to see, movies we want to see, what video games, whatever it might be. Where you think of more sort of directly consumer-used items, that you would have, I call this the artistic freedom voucher, some chunk of money, and say something like $75, not a magic sum, but just to give you an idea of a ballpark number, that every person in the country would be able to contribute to the individual or organization of their choice who produces, music, videos, whatever it might be. And the condition of getting the money is that everything you do over the period you're getting it, have some time after you get it as well, just to prevent people from sort of hiding stuff. But in any case, anything you do over the period in which you're getting the money is fully in the public domain. And what's nice about this is it's totally self-enforcing in the sense that you don't have to do anything. Suppose someone gets a brilliant idea, they're just going to cheat. They're going to take their money under the system, and then they're going to go out and get a copyright and try and get themselves real rich. Well, all you have to do is show, well, this person actually was getting money under the system. Of course, you have to be registered, so to get the money. So you're under the system. So what that means is your copyright isn't valid. So you just wasted your time, because anyone who wants to could just download, reproduce your stuff. You can't do anything to them because your copyright isn't valid. And this also is a nice feature that's totally individual, that, whoever, you give money to whoever you want, whatever organization you want. If they support writing mystery novels or creating jazz music, that's fine. The only condition is that everything they do is in the public domain.
So going back to the first one, let's say there's this group called the National Institute of Software or something. Like, the way the NIH works is that basically scientists submit grant proposals to the NIH, and then every 6 months or so, the top scientists all fly out and get locked in a room in DC and go through these thousands of grant proposals and kind of, write ratings and evaluations of them. So it's just more of this peer review system where scientists rate the proposals of other scientists. How would you do it with software? I mean, you talk about having a private corporation kind of do it. So would we establish a corporation which would have its own software czar and decide what needed to be worked on, and then the government would evaluate them? How would that work?
I'd actually be for some competition here. You have a number of different, basically you'd have master contracts, so you could have some number, and I'm not attached to any fixed number, 10, 20 master contracts. The idea would be to get it out of Washington, so you have the original awarding of the contracts. Obviously, you're getting money from the government. That has to be done through some process. But then after that, they'd be for a long period, 8 years, 10 years, whatever it might be. There's no magic number there either. But the idea is that then, they come up for reevaluation and, have their contract reviewed. Everything's in the public domain. So, what did you do? Here you got, a grant that gave you, $100 million a year for 10 years, and, what did you do? And we have, 15 other organizations that also got $100 million a year. What did they do? So did you do more than them? Did you do less than them? And this is all public. So, the idea is that on the one hand, you'll have an open process where you could see, here are the different companies coming up, and, here's what they did. And, some could be nonprofits. I mean, I'm not saying they're all going to be, a private company in a traditional sense. It could be whatever they want. And each one could use whatever mechanism it likes to determine, to decide among, grantees. Some of them might want to go a traditional academic route. Some of them might try very, very different routes. So, that way you'll get, basically take advantage of competition. Let's see what works best.
And so how would the government decide who to give the 10 master contracts to? I mean, if I wanted to, start something where, I used Reddit to decide which projects got funded, would there be a chance of me getting a contract?
You used, I'm sorry,
what? Where I used something like Reddit.com or some kind of voting site where people, everybody goes and votes up and down on which software proposals they like, and I build some website that handles it.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that would be an unreasonable thing. I mean, you'd have a harder time in round one than, in round two, round three. And, of course, they all don't have to be put out at the same time. So it probably makes sense to say, okay, for setting this up, that you let out your contracts over, the initial contracts over, say, a 2-year, 2.5, 3-year period, so that each time you let out a master contract, you get some insight to the problem, so that hopefully you'll do better the next time. But then after you've had the system in place for, 3, 4, 5 years, first off, there's always going to be performance reviews. So if, someone's been getting money for 3 years and it looks like they've done absolutely nothing, or there's fraud or something, of course you take it away from them. That's always going to be the case. But, after you've seen what seems to be working, then, you take advantage of it and change that. And if you have, people voting, this is good, this is bad, and that looks like that's producing good software, that's fine. But, I don't know offhand whether that will or it won't. But, it's a reasonable mechanism to try. And if it turns out that, in, by a variety of measures that produces good software, then that's great.
So you have similar systems for textbooks and clinical trials, right? Do those work basically the same way?
Exactly. So the idea again, you want diversity of sources, so you want competition, but the key is that basically the payment is made up front. So once you have, it's taking advantage of technology. Once you have a product created, once we have a work of art, music, movie, in the case of clinical trials, we have the drug created. Why charge people a ridiculous amount of money to get something that's, basically free or very close to free? Let's, the choice is made up front where you're paying, in the case of drugs, the researchers, in the case of, music, the artist, the recording artist. That's where the choice is really made. Once it's, once the work is already done, it's basically free. So let's let people get it for free.
I mean, one of the problems I have when talking to people about these kinds of things is that it's such a different model from what they're used to that they seem to have a tough time understanding. Like, they're just so ingrained in thinking that when you write a piece of software, it's yours, you own it, and you charge for it. With this whole model of hiring someone to produce a piece of software and then giving it away for free, it's not something that they've ever really experienced in their everyday life. It seems so alien to them that, the first couple of times you explain it, they just don't really understand what you're talking about. I mean, even with the NIH, which is all government funded, I believe, until recently, you didn't even have to release any papers that were done with government work to the public. Only recently they have this requirement. You have to post stuff on PubMed. And even then, I think, it's largely being evaded.
And it's delayed, yeah. No, it is really striking, and a lot of this is hugely ideological. And the industries involved, of course, have sought to promote that. So, they say, well, this is stealing, and the Recording Industry Association, if you look on their website, they talk about they've prepared curriculum, some for, I think, as low as the first grade. They're supposed to teach people to respect copyright. And, I understand, and the whole point is we want recording artists to be paid, so it's not like we expect people to spend, months, years producing music or movies or whatever is their area of work and not get compensated for it. The question is, what is the mechanism? And copyright is one mechanism. That's one way. And, but to try to have this discussion and say, okay, here's one way in which we could support music, or one way we could support the development of prescription drugs. Let's look at alternatives. It is a very big jump, and it's just like it shouldn't be, because it's this didn't come from nature. This was a government creation, and it serves a useful purpose. Of course, it does. We value the drugs that have been developed, or a lot of good music has been produced at least partly with the incentive of copyright. That's not really what's at issue. The question is, can we do better?
Yeah, I think that's the biggest problem, is people see, private property as part of the natural order. If I own a couch, right, it's my couch, I get to decide how to use it. And the industries have been very effective at kind of mapping that metaphor onto intellectual property, as they call it. So if I write this piece of software, it's mine, I get to decide how people use it. And this idea, that's embedded in the Constitution, that copyright isn't this natural right, that it's a government program to promote progress and, in science. It's just, even when you point people to the Constitution, they still don't really seem to get the concept.
No, that's right. I mean, the industry has really pushed this for people to think that this is just natural, and the idea that, no, this is a government policy. And actually, I love this section of the Constitution. I'm sure you've looked at it, that it just says, in order to promote useful arts and sciences, the Congress has the authority to grant copyright for a period of time. And, so one, it says in order to promote. That's probably not verbatim, but it's something to that effect. So it's clear it's a public policy purpose. This isn't in the Bill of Rights. This is a public policy purpose. It's in order to promote the useful arts and sciences. So it's one way in which you could do it, and that says Congress will have the authority. So it's not that Congress has to. So it's it's in the same section where it delineates the power of Congress to tax. So it would be as though Congress, if it didn't have taxes, that it would have violated the Constitution. I mean, that's absurd. It's one of its powers. It has the power to create copyright. It doesn't have to do it if it decides it's not the best way to support creative and artistic work. But yeah, it's a real big struggle just getting people to recognize that this is a policy. This isn't sort of an inherent property right. It's actually very funny. I've had arguments. I was arguing with a friend of mine, who's a progressive economist, and he's being very polite with me, but it's clear he didn't understand at all what I was saying. And finally, at one point, he got kind of angry, and he goes, well, if you took my book and made a million copies, without my permission, how's that any different than if I just took your car and sold it in Mexico?
Wow.
And he just couldn't see the distinction. I mean, it was amazing.
That's incredible. So, with healthcare, I guess you have kind of a similar proposal, right? Where you're kind of breaking people out of the mindset that there's this proprietary managed care model, and saying, well, let's have that, but let's also compete against the government providing Medicare for anybody who wants it. And do you see that?
Yeah, here too. I mean, again, so often the right has framed these issues and done a very, very good job of saying, well, on the one hand, you have the liberals, progressives who want the government to do everything, and then you have, us that, we want to leave things to the market, and, we'll just see how things turn out. And, of course, we're very, very far from a market model in healthcare, because in addition to the issue of patent protection, I mean, insurance contracts are very heavily regulated by the government, and, in fact, if you didn't have very special conditions under insurance contracts, the insurance industry go out of business. Specifically, they have the option, unlike most contracts, if you don't disclose information to your insurer, they can use that as grounds to basically void the contract. Whereas typically, if you're buying a house from me and, you didn't take the opportunity to, look over the house, well, that's your problem. Whereas in this case, I signed a contract with Aetna or some other insurer, and it turns out, well, I had a heart condition, I didn't tell them about it, or whatever it might be. They void the contract.
And then they have the right to go and turn around if you tell them that information and use that to exclude you from getting health care.
Exactly. So this is a very, very, closely regulated market. So the idea that somehow this is just, the free market that we have today, no, this is a very, very heavily regulated market. And, what strikes me is just say, okay, we already have the Medicare system, obviously just for people over 65 and also disabled people. Why don't we just expand that, and make that available for the population as a whole, let workers, employers buy into it, and let them compete, and we'll see who wins. And, to my mind, that seems pretty hard to make an argument against, because, people want to rant and rave and say how inefficient the government is. You just go, well, fine, stick with Aetna, stick with whoever you have. We're just trying to give people a choice.
So, that seems to be the option that most of the major Democratic candidates this time adopted, right? Edwards, Obama, and Clinton all kind of had a version of this proposal.
Yeah, there's a political scientist at Yale University, Jacob Hacker, who wrote this up, and all three of them took up a version of it. Now, we're going to have to see, going into the fall election, whether Senator Obama actually sticks with that, because, it's, I think, somewhat up for grabs, because you could take that in lots of different directions. And to my mind, what's really central in that plan is that you have a good publicly provided system that people have the option to buy into. And I'd really love to see Obama reassert that that's central in his plan, because I haven't heard him say that for a while, so I'm hoping he will.
What has he been asserting instead?
Well, there's a possibility that in that plan you could envision, instead of a public plan, you could go the route that with the federal government, federal employees, they have the FEHB, the Federal Employees Health Benefit Plan or program. That's simply it's a set of plans. So there isn't actually a government plan there. It's a set of private plans that people could choose among. I think there's 6, 8, something like that. So it's a number of plans that are in some sense regulated by the federal government by virtue of the fact that they're in that set, but they aren't actually a government-run plan. So I think it's very important to have something Medicare-like that could take advantage of economies of scale, that will have low marketing costs, that will have won't have to pay dividends to shareholders, won't have to have CEOs getting $10 million, $20 million, whatever it might be. There actually has to be a public plan. So the question is whether he'll reaffirm his commitment towards that.
So I think one of the nice things about that is that it kind of opens the door to a single-payer healthcare plan somewhere down the line. If you imagine you have the government competing against private insurance, and more people start switching to the government plan because of these economies of scale and because these efficiencies of having lower administrative costs and less trying to penny pinch and things like that. That suddenly soon the majority of the population will be on a government plan, and from there it's much easier to kind of transition to a single-payer model.
Absolutely. I think that's very, very likely where you will end up. And as I say, what I like about this is if you end up there because that's been shown to be the most efficient system. And my belief is that it is the most efficient system. But we could let the market determine that. Get it out there. And if it's a bad system, we don't want it to. We don't want a bad single payer system. So the idea is that if we get to a single payer system because it outcompetes the private plans, well, that sort of speaks for itself. It must be a pretty good system if people prefer that to the private plans.
So one of the frightening things is that Obama seems to have, said he kind of opposes single payer, unlike John Edwards, who said, he wants to move towards it. Do you think, I have these arguments with my friends all the time, and they say, Obama's just saying this stuff so that Fox News doesn't bash on him. Where do you stand? Do you think he really believes in these kinds of things, or is he, just trying to be conservative to get past the general election?
I don't know what he believes at the end of the day. He's obviously an extremely skilled politician. He managed to get the nomination, and certainly, Senator Clinton walked in there with an enormous advantage, certainly with her fundraising and name recognition. So, incredibly skilled politician. And, I really don't know what he believes. He's said some very good things. He's said some things that, I really wish he hadn't. What will he end up doing if he's president? I think he's a good politician in the sense he's leaving his options open. I would say his first priority is winning the election. In a certain sense, I can't quarrel with that much, in the sense that obviously if he doesn't win the election, he's not going to be able to do anything. But, yeah, I'm very worried what he'll do after. I sort of think it'd be foolish for us or anyone to take for granted what he will do. Going back to 92, when Clinton came in, and I had more reason to be concerned about Clinton because many of the things he had done prior to taking office were, very much on the conservative side of the political spectrum. But, he very much kept his options open, and if you looked at a lot of the things he said before the election, what he did after, they're very, very different. So, I think Obama, the same way, is keeping his options open. I don't think he's, ruled out some things that are more progressive, but I don't think we should take it for granted that he'll do, a lot of progressive things. A lot will depend on, for example, how many Democrats are in the Senate, which Democrats are in the Senate. But, if you have 56, 57 Democrats in the Senate, which isn't, to my mind, ridiculous given the way things are shaping up right now, there could be some real possibilities. But, this is all, these people are all politicians, and, whatever his personal views might be, what's going to be much more important is what makes sense to him politically. So if there's not pressure for him to, adopt a good health care plan, he's not going to do it, and you could say that about anything that might be on our list.
So, people have been kind of doing this reading the tea leaves stuff during the general election campaign. Which economic advisor did he hire? Which foreign policy people did he hire? I know there was a big flap with kind of the labor unions and stuff going after him because of this, he hired Jason Furman as his kind of economic leader position. Do you think this is part of putting the pressure on him? Do you think it's too early?
I think it's totally reasonable for people to be asking the questions, and I wasn't particularly surprised by him picking Jason Furman. A little bit of a disappointment, but it wasn't a huge surprise to me. I know Jason; he's not a bad guy. I think people have given him a worse rap than he probably deserves. But in any case, he's definitely closely tied to Robert Rubin. He headed up the Hamilton project at Brookings, which was Robert Rubin's baby. So that is where he's coming from. So, it was definitely a sign that the Wall Street Democrats have the inside line. But, I don't take it as a done deal that they're going to get everything they want. But it's, at the moment, and again, it almost would have been a surprise to me the other way, because, had he picked, people are talking about, some of my friends, the Economic Policy Institute, Jamie Galbraith, other people that he might have had as his sort of inside guy on econ. Had he picked one of those people, the Wall Street people would have gone nuts. And, again, this gets back to what I was saying before about the media. They still have enormous influence in the media. You would be having, the Washington Post running editorials about how irresponsible this is. It shows Obama's not serious, and, he'd constantly be questioned about this. This person and that person says, Jamie Galbraith isn't a good pick, or, whoever it might be. So he did what was a cautious thing to do, and from his vantage point, again, it's not what I would have liked to have seen, but he's trying to get elected. He's going to pick someone like Furman if it wasn't actually Furman.
Some people have mentioned him picking you. Have you been approached by the campaign?
I've talked to people on the campaign, and I think they're willing to listen to things I say. They're not going to take any policy I hand to them carte blanche. I think they'll listen to them, but. I'm not in the position deciding, what policies the campaign picks up or not. So, I'm glad to have kind of a door open there. But, it's clear, they're interested in talking, but they're going to be deciding. So we'll see.
So, how do we put pressure on him? Obviously, the labor union's been kind of successful in the media pushing this Jason Furman story. But what are the other ways that actual people can do to fight back?
Well, there are, take advantage of our access to media that we have, raise the concrete issues, and try and pin him down. One of the things we were talking about a minute ago, his health care plan, is he going to have a good, public sector health care plan as part of his proposal, a Medicare-type plan? It's a very concrete, question, and, I think it'd be great if he were forced to answer that, yes or no. Maybe he'll hem and haw and try and avoid it, but it's a fairly concrete question and be reasonable to get an answer from. So, that would certainly be a way to do it. The other part of the story, of course, a lot's going to depend who's in Congress, and if we make sure that we have people in Congress that are committed to, a health care plan that, that involves a public sector plan, that will make a big difference. Because, again, just from a simple standpoint, as a politician, he wants to go the path of least resistance, and I don't mean that as a particular criticism. I think that's true of any politician. So if the path of least resistance is you got a bill coming out of the Senate that says we're going to create a Medicare type plan that anyone could buy into, well, I don't think he'll threaten to veto it. So we have to just be aggressive, be creative, use every channel we can, and you can't even say at this point what all those channels might be.
One of the things that worries me is that, he's been campaigning for conservatives in the Congress. So, famously he went and campaigned for Joe Lieberman in the Democratic primary, and then when Joe Lieberman didn't get nominated, he didn't really campaign for Ned Lamont. And Joe Lieberman ended up taking the seat, and now, is one of the biggest Obama bashers. And similarly, he cut an ad for this fellow John Barrow, who's a very right-wing conservative Democrat facing a progressive challenger. And so he's been actively working to get more conservative people in Congress. And then he's talked about using, his list, his kind of millions of activists who have signed up to kind of fight for him in the general election, and using that when he becomes president to go after Congress people. He talked about having this feature on his website where, he'd say, this is the bill Obama's trying to get passed through Congress this week. These are the Congress people obstructing it. Here are their phone numbers. And kind of using the, the power of the president and the power of the president's website and the email lists and the networks he's developed to, use that to kind of really ram things through Congress.
If he gets elected, it's going to be quite striking. He'll have really quite an apparatus behind him in a way that, we may have not seen at the presidential level since, maybe Roosevelt. That he will have, a lot of influence beyond just what a president traditionally has. And, where he takes it, again, I can't really say. We'll just have to see. But, in fairness to me, he has supported. I certainly wasn't thrilled about Lieberman. I knew people who worked on the Lamont campaign, and they were appalled. He did not help them, and that's certainly their view. And I have no reason to think they were, they're misrepresenting the situation. And the other cases, he has supported some conservatives. He did also support. I don't know if he formally endorsed her, but Donna Edwards, who just won a seat here from a very conservative Democrat up here in Maryland. So, and she's very progressive, I should point out. So I think he has. I don't think it's like he's been, going out of his way to support conservative Democrats against progressives. I think it's, he's made that call in some cases, and obviously I'm not happy about that. But I think it'd be unfair to say that he's always supported the conservatives against the progressives. I think it's much more mixed. And if we had the full list, my guess is it would probably go the other way. But in any case, it does raise concerns where he has supported those conservatives, because in some cases, certainly Lieberman just, he's been backing McCain. I was going to say for all practical purposes a Republican, he's been backing McCain, so I don't have to, step out of the line too much to say that. I think those are very bad choices, and we should be concerned.
Yeah, I think it's been really interesting how he's been kind of consolidating power. A lot of people have talked about Bush, creating this kind of unitary executive and really bringing a lot more power to the presidential and the executive branch than it previously had. But Obama's been doing something similar on the campaign. He moved very quickly to integrate the DNC. He put a lot of pressure to shut down these 527 organizations that were going after McCain. Just the other week, he forced MoveOn to close their 527. And he's really been trying to just coordinate the message out of, his Chicago offices and really make sure that he has this one team driving everything and shutting down this kind of cacophony of voices that's been set up by the Democrats in, their period in exile to go after the Republicans, the kind of message machine that they've built to, to kind of combat the more widespread stuff that the Republicans have built over the past 20, 30 years.
Well, I think that raises concerns. But his... it's a very different thing to, tell the Democrats to, you want to be the sole voice and you want to have control versus, being the president and sort of taking legal control, where you basically have the army, the police behind you. So I think those are somewhat different stories. I'm much more concerned about the latter than the former. But, yeah, I think it's totally reasonable to be raising questions. He could tell, move on. People are very, think of themselves sort of as part of the Democratic Party establishment to close down their operations, and I think most of them have. I don't know if maybe there's been some exceptions where they've been thumbing their nose at them, but I think most of the people that he's asked to shut down the 527 have done so. But there's still a very healthy blogosphere. There's there are plenty of other channels of political opinion. So I'm not that worried about that. To my mind, it's sort of a judgment call. He's running a campaign, and these people are clearly allied with him. It's not as though they're, they would otherwise be trashing him. So does he run the most effective campaign having it more centralized, or does he run the most effective campaign having somewhat of a free-for-all? My own view is I'd probably prefer the latter, but, it's his campaign, and, it's, be 4 months, and we'll see what will happen. But, I would worry if, 6 months, a year into the Obama presidency, somehow it's considered, improper to be criticizing him if he's not doing policies we approve of, whether it be from the right or left. I'm obviously more concerned he's going to be going to the right, but in any case, I value criticism, value dissent, and If you create an environment in which that becomes very difficult, that would clearly be a bad thing. But we have a long way to go before we're there.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, as you mentioned, Jacob Hacker and his colleague Paul Pearson have been talking about how one of the ways the Republicans got a lot done during the Bush administration, even when the public and Congress was against them, was by kind of using their power of the presidency to force Congress into various ways where they normally wouldn't go, and kind of really exercising a lot of control over the party and having them act as a unit. And it seems like Obama's really set up to kind of do things in the same way. I mean, I know it's been funny watching this struggle between him and MoveOn, where Obama's all like, donate money directly to my campaign. And MoveOn's been emailing the list saying, well, donate money to us and we'll run our own ads in favor of Obama. Don't donate money to Obama's campaign directly. And it seems clear that there's this kind of turf war going on for who can take credit for getting Obama elected. Matt Bai wrote this book saying that it was clear if the next president was a Democrat, it would be because of, the title of his book is like the billionaires and the bloggers. And Obama has really shut both of those down. He shut down the billionaires by shutting down these 527s, and he's kind of pushed out the bloggers by having people come to his site directly and join his social networks and his mailing lists.
Well, I'll be surprised if he's able to shut down the bloggers. I mean, that will, obviously some will take a hit, but, I think it's a more vibrant community than that. So, and I think if he gets too heavy-handed, I think he'll overplay his hand. So, again, I some consolidation, I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt a bit, but, as I say, if it goes too far, I think that, one, it probably isn't very smart of him, because you're not going to be able to do everything centrally, and two, I think people will rebel against that.
I mean, you've talked a lot about how the press kind of influences the debate and kind of the frames around politics. Do you think by having this kind of unified system, he'll be able to push back against the press? And
this is a very good case where I think you'd be much better off with a more diffuse response. For example, I'll just tell you one of the things I've written about a couple times on last week on Beat the Press, that there twice have been articles in major publications, I think one was in the Post and one was in the Times, where they talked about McCain supporting growth, and they compared that with Obama, who wants to help, families meet their bills, some language like that, again, not verbatim. And you just go, well, what does that mean to say McCain supports growth and, implicitly that Obama doesn't? The policies that, Obama supports have produced every bit as much, if not more, growth than the policies that McCain has supported. McCain's, the centerpiece of his economic agenda is the Bush tax cuts. And, frankly, the economy's done real bad under the Bush administration. And I'm always the first to say that's not entirely his fault. But you're a little hard-pressed to say, he had these big tax cuts and the economy went down the tube. Look how great they were. It's always possible. You could say it would have been worse if we didn't have the cuts. But you're pretty hard-pressed to say that these are pro-growth policies when they actually led to very, very poor growth. But yet, here it is, you have this frame that keeps getting repeated in the top news outlets that, McCain's pro-growth, whereas Obama, he's worried about health care and education, this and that, he doesn't really care about growth. Now, the fact that you have diverse voices, like I could just get out there and say this is garbage, Obama's campaign might be more reluctant to do that because they don't want to piss off the New York Times reporter or the Washington Post. I don't care. That they could say bad things about me. I mean, they're not writing about me. So I think he very much benefits from having diverse voices rather than trying to centralize it all so everything somehow carries the imprint of the campaign.
So, I mean, how do we push back against the press? Obviously, we can't, vote for a new one in 4 years, and presumably most of the people watching this are already reading blogs and getting their news from alternative sources, but, I mean, what else can we do?
Well, I mean, you can harass them, and I should be careful how I say that because people think, I've had some arguments of saying, well, people call us names. I don't want people to call them names, but I mean, when they write bad stories, it's perfectly reasonable to write them a letter, an email, and go, look, here's why it was a bad story. You said that, you said McCain likes growth and Obama doesn't. What do you mean by that? Of course McCain says he likes growth. Obama says he likes growth too. So don't go creating these stereotypes. Just stick to the facts. I mean, this is just straight journalism. I mean, 99% of the stuff I print, I think, is pretty much just straight journalism. McCain says he supports growth. Obama says he supports growth. So don't just go saying McCain likes growth and Obama doesn't. This is just, So, as I said, I've been struck by how sensitive some of these reporters are. And, I think when you sort of lay the facts on the table and, let them know that they're not doing good reporting. I think that has an impact. Now, that's not going to change everything overnight, and a lot of the reporters probably don't care. I suspect Thomas Friedman, for example, is a columnist, but, he can probably get everything wrong every day for the rest of his life, and he won't care. But, most of them, I find a lot of them do try to, be serious reporters, and, part of it is they just... again, they're going the path of least resistance. I was giving the Microsoft example before. If they say Bill Gates, did something he didn't do, they're going to really pay for it. On the other hand, if they write a stupid thing about the campaign where they caricature the candidates in an inappropriate way, they won't pay anything. So at the very least, we could, give them some harassment, raise it with their editors. What do you mean? Why are you having reporters say this? They will respond somewhat. They're not just going to, turn over and die, but they will be somewhat responsive, and people are doing that now, and I think they have been somewhat responsive, but we just have to keep pressing them. I should actually say a little more on that if you go back to the Social Security privatization debate in 2005, I think we were extremely effective in changing the coverage, because we jumped on them. Every time they would say stuff about, repeating the crisis story, how Social Security is about to go bankrupt, we go, no, that's not true. Here's what the projections show. You can look at the trustees report. You can look at the Congressional Budget Office. They don't show it's about to go bankrupt. And they stopped doing that. Not everyone, but most of them stopped doing that.
But sometimes it seems like they're much more responsive to these kinds of critiques from the right than from the left. I mean, you have groups like Accuracy in Media and Brent Bezell's, I think it's called the Media Research Coalition, and they cough and journalists get all scared. Dan Rather said it was like having a flaming tire thrown around your neck. Meanwhile, we have Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting on the left, which puts out this great email list with, densely reported explanations of exactly what the media got wrong with quotes and citations and, just every week spelling out grievous errors. And, occasionally the ombudsman will send them a form letter or something saying, well, you guys were just wrong.
There's no doubt. I mean, the right has a huge leg up. I mean, if you look at, what Accuracy in Media has to, as their budget versus fair, I suspect it's probably, a factor of 10, factor of 20. And, they're treated as being respectable, and half of them are close to lunatics. They get upset. I remember back during the first Iraq War, they had Reed Irvine was on one of the CNN or, one of the networks, doesn't matter which one. And they asked him, because CNN was, of course, reporting from Baghdad, and he was very upset by that. You had these stories of, where the bombs missed their targets and they hit civilian areas and people died or whatever. So they asked him, they said, well, he was very upset they were reporting this. They said, are you saying it's not true? And he's going, no, I'm not saying it's not true. The most effective propaganda is true. And that's almost verbatim. You go back and look that up. But, this is close to crazy. So he's upset that they're reporting things that are true. That's not what FAIR complains about. FAIR complains about them reporting things that aren't true.
Why is that? It's not just the budget, obviously, right? Ames people get on TV and FAIR's don't. The last time I saw Peter Hart on TV was when The Daily Show was making fun of him.
Yeah, well, as I say, it's an uphill struggle. These people are given credence because of who they are. They have money. They have connections to power, and that it is an uphill struggle. But all I can say is that we've made a lot of progress. We're a lot further than we were, say, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and I think the Internet's a really, really big factor. But no, it's still hugely stacked, and there's a lot of other factors go into this as well. I'd say the professionalization of academia very much is conservative, and that helps to enshrine, conservative, if not ideology, and conservative policy. Just take the war in Iraq. Here you have all these experts that were completely wrong about Iraq, what the outcomes would be of the invasion, and yet they're still the experts. Somehow it doesn't jeopardize them. Well, they'll always be the experts rather than the anti-war people that didn't get their degrees from, Harvard or Princeton because, well, they didn't get their degrees from Harvard and Princeton, and the fact that they happen to be right, that really doesn't count for much.
Yeah. Well, we're almost out of time. Here's a question. If you could change one kind of media frame or media assumption, what would you change?
I think the market versus the government story. I think we have to pound it into their heads that we're not arguing over, conservatives liking the market, every person for themselves, the winners come out okay, the losers, too bad for them, versus all of the do-gooders who want the government to intervene and do everything. We're talking about different regulatory structures, and both the right and left want the government to intervene in the economy. The question is, what do they want the government to do? I think that's far and away the most important thing, because that framing is hugely disadvantageous to progressives.
So I'll end by plugging your book, The Conservative Nanny State, which pushes back against this frame. Is just a fun read in general. And, full disclosure, I hope put it on the web at conservativenannystate.com.
Which we much appreciate.
Well, thanks a lot for doing this today.
Sure, thanks a lot, Aaron. I enjoyed it.
Talk to you later.